Welcome to episode 116 of the Civil Engineering Podcast, the first podcast dedicated to helping civil engineering professionals succeed in work and life. While this is the 116th episode of the Civil Engineering Podcast, this is only the 7th episode we are broadcasting via video on YouTube, which we plan to do more often, so please be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. If you'd like to listen to any of our past 115 episodes, visit civilengineeringpodcast.com. I am your host, Anthony Fasano. I am a licensed professional engineer who practiced as a civil engineer, but eventually decided I wanted to focus more on inspiring engineers rather than doing the engineering myself. So since then, I've written a book called Engineer Your Own Success and have traveled the world helping engineers. And through this podcast, myself and my co-host, Chris Knutson, try to bring you information that can help you succeed in every episode. I've also had the honor of authoring the American Society of Civil Engineers Careers and Leadership column for the past few years. In this episode, I will sit down with Matthew Lose, PE, a civil engineer who wrote an awesome book that I believe will help all engineers be more successful in the years ahead. He's going to tell you about the book and how you can get it through a special Kickstarter campaign at bizofengineering.com. Let's jump right in. Anthony Fasano here from the Engineering Management Institute, and I'm thrilled to welcome Matt Lose onto the Civil Engineering Podcast. Matt, welcome.
Thank you.
So Matt's a civil engineer here in the Fort Worth area, but Matt, why don't you describe for our listeners a little bit about what you do as a civil engineer?
Right, yeah. As a private site civil, I basically handle everything 5 foot outside of a private development, so anything from retail to mixed use to multifamily.
Okay, great. And I'm here with Matt because Matt, as a listener to the podcast, reached out to me a little while ago and said, Anthony, I wrote a book, believe it or not. It's called The Business of Engineering, which we're going to talk about in this interview. And he said, I want to kind of move the book forward. Can I let you take a look at it? I said, yeah, send me a chapter. I loved it. I said, send me another chapter. And now we're engaged in a Kickstarter campaign where EMI is going to be publishing the book, and I'm really excited about it. And we're going to dive into that. So first things first, Matt, is The Business of Engineering is the title you came up for this book that you just decided to write. And, you know, Matt's a busy civil engineer like many of you listening or watching. And you must have really felt like you wanted to write this book. So tell the audience, frame it out. What does the business of engineering mean to you, at least?
So when I first got the idea, literally it's something that had been going on in my head for a long time, but it hit me at night right before bed, like most good ideas.
Right.
And I got to a point where I just couldn't go to sleep. I was writing the chapters in my head, and the idea stems from the idea that as technology evolves over the coming fourth industrial revolution, which we're currently in, it's going to require the engineer of the present and future to also evolve with it. We can't utilize the same thinking and teaching that has been taught for centuries, and the engineer will have to become a better communicator, a better manager, in order to basically communicate the technological advances to others.
Yeah, I mean, I love the idea. I mean, when I read the book myself and I said, Matt, this is great. We got to get this out to more engineers. And it's exactly what Matt's saying, which is essentially what helped engineers to be successful up today is not the same skills and the same habits that we're going to need to be successful in the future. So, you know, how can we help engineers today to develop these kind of quote unquote business skills and different things that Matt talks about in the book? And, you know, he did a lot of research on this in terms of researching successful business people that have engineering backgrounds, which again puts a lot of context to the book. And the other thing that he did in the book was he laid out some really good frameworks, which we'll get into a little bit. A 6-step process for solving problems that Matt's kind of put together in his own experience has been helpful. 5 steps to kind of limiting technical errors or miscalculations and things like that. And we'll dive into some of those. But it's one thing to get this idea in your head before bedtime that I have to write this book. It's another thing to actually write it. I mean, it's a big process to write a book. I mean, this is a good 200 or so page book. You must have really just been inspired to keep going and doing it on a day in and day out basis. Right.
It was a multi-year. I mean, I'm probably about 3.5, 4 years into it.
Okay.
Just waking up early, writing a chapter, or writing a few paragraphs here, coming back, reading it, just day in, day out, just trying to find some time. The idea of the book kept me going throughout, and trying to get that idea out to others. So.
Right. And it's not just the idea. What I love, I mean, we do a lot of content at EMI, obviously our podcast and everything else. So there's tons of content out there, but what I loved about the book and the reason that we wanted to publish it was because it's an idea, but there's also frameworks within the book to help people transfer the idea back to the job, back to your engineering job, which is important. I mean, if you have a 6-step problem-solving process that you can go through on a regular basis to make you maybe think a little bit different, that's valuable.
Practical, yes.
Yeah, practical stuff that you could transfer things back to the job. So I think that that's valuable. The other thing I want to ask you, Matt, is you're a pretty young guy. You haven't been in engineering forever. You are licensed.
Yes.
You have responsibilities in your company. You've kind of moved up, done a great job there. I'm sure people are going to be thinking, well, young guy wrote this book, where did all this experience in the book and everything come from? Was it just from your career and people?
Right. It's a mixture, really. It came from all of the great mentors I've had up to this point, as well as just doing research on my own, and then obviously my real-world experience. While it's only about 6 years now, there's still a lot of practical experiences that came. I mean, I'm seeing the same thing that people that are, well into their careers are seeing. So yeah, for sure. I mean, if you read this book and you didn't know what Matt's experience level was, I think you'd probably think he was more experienced than he is in terms of years, at least, because it feels like, you did a lot of research for it, you had a lot of experiences, and that's obvious in the book, which is great. And so let's talk a little bit about some of these frameworks in the book. I really like these frameworks, like the 6-step problem-solving process. And what I want to focus on in that process is the first step. The first step, which is to identify the problem. Right. Talk a little bit about that and the kind of the strategy that you give in the book, because engineers are dealing with problems every day. Civil engineers deal with very complex problems. And I feel like this is kind of one step that maybe a lot of people skip over. Yeah. Well, it can also, in the book, I mentioned that sometimes the result appears to be the problem when really there's a problem that caused that result, and digging deeper to find what really is causing that issue. In the book, I refer to maybe an engineering company that can't find work with a certain municipality. Well, is that because you don't have a firm in that city, or what's the real issue? And it's asking those questions repeatedly. Well, why is this? Why is that? And ultimately coming up with the root of the problem being not attending more events, or not being present in that city. It's just digging deeper to find the root of the problem.
Yeah, finding the root of the problem. And yeah, it was a good example, actually. It was a firm that wasn't getting work in a city because they didn't have an office location in that city. So they weren't as local as some of the other companies. And by using this method and drilling down and asking why, kind of the example showed that they identified that they weren't attending enough networking events like other companies in the municipality, and then they could start doing that, and that would hopefully try to solve this problem of them not getting enough work. And so again, it's a 6-step process that he lays out in the book, The Business of Engineering, and that's the first step, which is just to identify the problem. And when I read that, I really liked that, because as an engineer myself, we're all deal with problems. I mean, it doesn't even have to be engineering. It could be a personal problem, whatever the case may be. And if you don't get to the root of that problem, then you can't really solve the problem.
Right.
You can put a Band-Aid on it. You could try something that'll work here and there, but it's not going to solve that problem. So that's one example of a framework in this book that you can take and apply to improve yourself as an engineer overall. The other kind of process that I talked about was this 5-step process, kind of like a checklist more or less, that you could take to limit technical errors. Listen, part of the business of engineering is providing high quality plans so that companies continue to hire you and your firm. So, what made you kind of think about that for the book?
Well, it's on everyone's mind. You're being told that the work needs to be done in a certain amount of time, and this goes for any engineering or any business really, and it has to be accurate. So how do you balance the accuracy versus productivity, basically? And it's the idea came because it's such a common struggle, I feel like, with most engineers, is trying to find that balance of accuracy and detail orientedness versus productivity.
Right. Yeah, that it is, and I'm glad you put it in there, because it is. I mean, I talk to a lot of engineering firms, and quality sometimes is an issue in terms of people missing things and errors occurring. And so again, and this is, I think, something that you talk about in the book in general, is having some good systems in place, right, to make sure that you don't have these types of problems, or that you are cultivating the right habits in your career. And I found that to be pretty powerful. So how about just in general your goal with the book in terms of, I mean, it does sound like what you're aiming for is for people to really be able to use this stuff.
Right. Yeah. The goal is that people, engineers, kind of shake off a stereotype that ultimately I think is detrimental to engineering as a whole, is that an engineer has to be, they have to be some type of stereotype before they become successful, basically trying to find a way to cultivate some of these soft skills that aren't necessarily taught in schools today,
right?
And giving them some practical advice, practical experience to help move the needle, I guess, for engineers to be pushed into that more leadership role in not only their careers but in society as well.
Yeah, and it's great. And what I really liked about the book as well, and one of the reasons that we wanted to publish it, is because we're constantly looking for tools and strategies to help engineers, think differently, to be innovative, right, and to move with all the technology and evolve, so to speak. And what Matt has kind of captured, I think, in this book is he's taken a lot of these business-related experiences or business skills or interpersonal skills, these different types of skill sets that engineers of the future will need, no doubt. And again, he's putting them into practical frameworks. So he's giving you examples from his research of why we kind of need to do it. And then you're also giving frameworks of how we can do it. And I think that that's what makes for a good book or good content, is when you say, listen, this is really important. This is why we need to do it. But oh, by the way, here's what you can do to actually do it. There's lots of books out there that talk about all these skills and being a great leader, but they don't give you the practical steps, tools, strategies, frameworks to actually go and implement it in your career. And quite frankly, engineers are busy, so they don't have time to figure those frameworks out right now.
Yeah.
They want the framework to take it, apply it, and become a better overall engineer. And I believe that that's what Matt has done through this book, and that's why we're excited. We're running the Kickstarter campaign. Please consider supporting it. We've got some great rewards in there for engineers of all experience levels that couple the book along with some of EMI services. So if you're a student, you can get the book, and along with it, you can get our resume and interview course. If you're a manager, you can get our accelerator course with the book. If you are a high-level manager, you can get bundles of the book and hand them out to your recent graduates, younger engineers. So it's not about the book, it's about the philosophy, which is what, Matt and I in our conversations we continue to think about is civil engineers, all engineers, if they adopt this business of engineering mindset, it can really change the way they do engineering.
Right.
And that's what we're excited about. So again, Matt Lose, he's the author of The Business of Engineering. Matt's going to stick with us here. We're going to put him on the hot seat for a minute here, the civil engineering hot seat, a couple more questions. But you can find the Kickstarter campaign at thebizofengineering.com. Again, that's thebizofengineering.com. You can go there. It's a short time frame, so please go there right away. And if you're interested, if you want to get a copy of this book and really start to live the business of engineering philosophy, you can please do that. Again, you can check it out at thebizofengineering.com, but stay with us here. We're going to come back in a moment and do our civil engineering hot seat segment.
PPI is a proud sponsor of the Engineering Management Institute. Thinking about advancing in your career by taking your FE, PE, or SE exam? Visit ppi2pass.com to find everything you need to start preparing today. I hope you're enjoying this episode of the Civil Engineering Podcast on YouTube. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel here for more podcast episodes and for all of our Engineering Manager 80/20 Shorts videos where we interview successful engineering managers and bring their strategies to you. Now it's time to jump into the Civil Engineering Hot Seat segment.
All right, we're back with Matt Lose here on the Civil Engineering Podcast. Again, we're running a Kickstarter campaign together. EMI is going to be publishing Matt's book, The Business of Engineering. You can check out the campaign at bizofengineering.com. There's some great rewards. Please take advantage of it. It's a short time frame, but I know you're going to love the content of this book if you're a fan of this podcast. All right, so are you ready for the hot seat, Matt?
I guess so. I'm ready as I'll ever be. Let's do this.
All right, so the first question is, are there any specific rituals that you practice every day? For example, do you have a specific morning routine or something you do at lunch or something that you do regularly that helps to contribute to your success?
Yeah. I enjoy physical activity, and so every morning I work out pretty much religiously. It's a way to clear my mind for the day. It really gets me going, gets the blood moving, and I can't get rid of that routine.
Right. So
It's with me to stay.
Before work every morning?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
First thing in the morning.
Great.
And I'd say that's my...
Is that weights or running or combo? Or
a little combo,
yeah. Good.
Yeah. It's a great stress reliever.
Yeah, I'm sure
in a business like this, it's great.
And probably a good way to start the day and get things going. All right. Second question, what is one book that you recommend to engineers regularly, or just one book that you found to be extremely helpful in your own personal or professional development?
My go-to, but this isn't really engineering related, but is Rich Dad, Poor Dad.
Okay. Yeah, any book works.
Yeah.
That's a good one.
Yeah, it's...
Robert Kiyosaki.
Yes, sir. It's kind of gives me a perspective that I wasn't... you don't often get in engineering school.
Yeah.
A business perspective, that is. Yes.
Yeah, it's a business perspective. It's a good book. And I read it actually not too long ago myself for the first time after I keep hearing about it. Rich Dad, Poor Dad, Rich Dad, Poor Dad. Finally read it, and it is a really good book. And it's not like overly complex, right? It's kind of like spend less money than you make, more or less. But
more or less, yes.
But I mean, he does go into detail in it and talk about a lot of things that were very helpful. But again, that's what happens when you think about books. And again, as I mentioned, Matt wrote the book, The Business of Engineering, that we're going to be publishing. It's like when you read a book, there's always like the big takeaway.
Yeah.
Right? And that's what you always remember about the book.
Mm-hmm.
And so like Rich Dad, Poor Dad for me, what I remember is, stay clear of debt. In terms of like cars and,
bad debt. Yeah.
Yeah, bad debt.
Yeah.
Expensive houses that you don't need and things of that nature, which is really good advice that a lot of Americans don't follow, which is a whole other podcast episode. But again, that's one of the reasons that we really jumped at Matt's book, was because, again, it's about taking an idea and then implementing it, right? So like when I read Rich Dad, Poor Dad, I made some just fundamental financial strategy changes for me, right? And that's, I think, what any kind of content you develop, I think that's what you want to do.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Is leave something for people to take and act on. All right, 2 more questions here for you, Matt. First one is, you've had several probably managers in your engineering career, and I'm not asking you to name someone specifically, but if you think of one of your favorite managers that you've had, someone that you would say would be like your best manager, what is the reason that they're your favorite?
Wow.
Like, what is something that they did that you liked a lot, or something that made them say, that was a great manager?
Right. Respect is big. When you first start out, you don't know a whole lot getting into the field. So having somebody that respects, shows respect to somebody that doesn't know a whole lot and realizes where they've been, kind of goes along with empathy, but understands what it's like. I think that was big starting out. Just having a healthy respect. Having
someone respect you at such a young age type of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, yeah, that's great. All right, so last question on the hot seat here. If you were to get into an elevator with a civil engineer and you had about 30 seconds with him or her to give some sound career advice, what would you say to that person? Besides read The Business of Engineering.
Yeah, it's all there. So I would say, obviously, show respect to everyone you're dealing with. Have integrity. It goes along with respect, but it goes a long way in your career, in your personal, professional career. It goes a long way is to be somebody with integrity, to be trustworthy.
Mm-hmm. It's a reputation.
That's something that is tough to gain if you lose.
Right.
So
good advice. That's great. All right. So again, here with Matt Lewis. Matt's a civil engineer, and he wrote the book, The Business of Engineering. And I read a couple chapters and said, send me the whole book, and we love it, and we want to publish it. And I hope that you'll consider going to bizofengineering.com. It's a Kickstarter campaign. The rewards are crafted just for you as an engineer. We have rewards for every level of engineers. And it's really more than a book. I think it's a philosophy. I think it's a philosophy that Matt and I both think is what engineers will need to adopt to be successful in the future. Because, going forward with complex projects and technology and all evolution that's continuing to go faster and faster and faster, you need to be ready for that. You need to be thinking in different ways. You need to be developing different skills. And I believe that the Business of Engineering philosophy, which is in the book, and the framework in the book can really, really help you to do that. So, Matt, thank you so much for spending some time with us here on the Civil Engineering Podcast, and we wish you all the best with the book.
All right. I appreciate it.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Civil Engineering Podcast on YouTube. Please be sure to visit bizofengineering.com to support the Business of Engineering Kickstarter campaign and get the framework that will help you be the most successful engineer that you can be.